This is a CBS News special report. I'm Margaret Brennan in Washington. We are coming to you on the air to bring you an announcement from the Department of Justice. Attorney General Merrick Garland is making a statement and is making some detailed remarks that we will bring you in a moment. What we know is that it has to do with President Biden's son, Hunter Biden. Let's listen in.
Good afternoon. I'm here today to announce the appointment of David Weiss as a special counsel, consistent with the Department of Justice regulations governing such matters. In keeping with those regulations, I have today notified the designated members of each House of Congress of the appointment. In February 2018, after being nominated by the former president and confirmed by the Senate, Mr. Weiss was sworn in as the United States Attorney for the District of Delaware. Mr. Weiss had been a career prosecutor, having served previously in the office for more than a decade. Beginning in 2019, Mr. Weiss, in his capacity as U.S. Attorney and along with federal law enforcement partners, began investigating allegations of certain criminal conduct by, among others, Robert Hunter Biden. That investigation has been recently referenced in federal criminal proceedings in the District of Delaware, and as noted in those proceedings and other public statements by Mr. Weiss's office, that investigation remains ongoing. In February 2021, U.S. Attorney Weiss was asked to remain as U.S. Attorney for the District of Delaware and, in that capacity, to continue to lead the investigation. As I said before, Mr. Weiss would be permitted to continue his investigation, take any investigative steps he wanted, and make the decision whether to prosecute in any district. Mr. Weiss has told Congress that he has been granted ultimate authority over this matter, including the responsibility for deciding where, when, and whether to file charges, and for making decisions necessary to preserve the integrity of any prosecution consistent with federal law, the principles of federal prosecution, and departmental policies. In a July 2023 letter to Congress, Mr. Weiss said that he had not to that point requested special counsel designation. On Tuesday of this week, Mr. Weiss advised me that in his judgment, his investigation had reached a stage at which he should continue his work as a special counsel, and he asked to be so appointed. Upon considering his request, as well as the extraordinary circumstances relating to this matter, I have concluded that it is in the public interest to appoint him as special counsel. This appointment confirms my commitment to provide Mr. Weiss all the resources he requests. It also reaffirms that Mr. Weiss has the authority he needs to conduct a thorough investigation and to continue to take the steps he deems appropriate independently, based only on the facts and the law. Mr. Weiss will also continue to serve as U.S. Attorney for the District of Delaware. As special counsel, he will continue to have the authority and responsibility that he has previously exercised to oversee the investigation and decide where, when, and whether to file charges. The special counsel will not be subject to the day-to-day supervision of any official of the department, but he must comply with the regulations, procedures, and policies of the department. Consistent with the special counsel regulations, at the conclusion of Mr. Weiss's work, he will provide me with a report explaining the prosecution or declination decisions reached by him. As with each special counsel who has served since I have taken office, I am committed to making as much of his report public as possible, consistent with legal requirements and department policy. Today's announcement affords the prosecutors, agents, and analysts working on this matter the ability to proceed with their work expeditiously and to make decisions indisputably guided only by the facts and the law. The men and women undertaking this investigation are public servants who have dedicated their careers to protecting the citizens of this country. The appointment of Mr. Weiss reinforces for the American people the department's commitment to both independence and accountability in particularly sensitive matters. I am confident that Mr. Weiss will carry out his responsibility in an even-handed and urgent manner and in accordance with the highest traditions of this department. Thank you.
If you as General Weiss had the authorities he needed,
You just heard some extraordinary remarks there from the Attorney General Merrick Garland, who walked off without taking those shouted reporter questions there, and there are many of them. What he just announced is going to have both tremendous legal and political implications. He just said that on Tuesday of this week, the U.S. Attorney in Delaware, his name is David Weiss, who was appointed by former President Trump and has continued in that role, did come to the Justice Department and asked the Attorney General for a special status, special counsel status. That legal status would allow for him to continue his ongoing investigations that include the already known part of the probe that has to do with Hunter Biden, President Biden's son. It may go beyond what we already know had been discussed with that same U.S. attorney, who was the U.S. attorney who handled that plea deal, which, if you recall, back in July, was entered and then fell apart. Well, now that U.S. attorney has come to Merrick Garland and asked to be given some level of independence from the department as special counsel. This raises a lot of questions, and we want to go right now to Weijia Jiang, our senior White House correspondent, who is standing on the North Lawn there. Weijia, I know neither of us are lawyers, but in terms of the politics of this, the White House has insisted throughout that they are not touching the Justice Department here and not having any influence over the Attorney General. Now this announcement really gives that special status to the Attorney General's claims by making David Weiss a special counsel. What do we know about whether this is the first time the White House has heard of the decision?
Well, so far, the White House has not offered any comment about this remarkable announcement, but it is really important to understand how we got here. It was just over 2 weeks ago that plea deal that you mentioned with Hunter Biden fell apart in a very dramatic fashion inside the courtroom. Hunter Biden thought that he was going to plead guilty to 2 misdemeanor tax fraud charges. He thought that there was going to be a separate diversion case for a gun charge, and that all fell apart and raised a lot of questions about whether this independence that we are now talking about existed. And so that is what we are doing here today, talking about this special counsel. But you are right that it is very likely that the White House will say nothing and say that they are absolutely independent of the DOJ. The president has said before the same thing, that he supports all the work that Attorney General Garland is doing, and that, he will not be commenting. One thing he has said, though, Margaret, with regard to his son Hunter Biden, is that he's very proud of his son. He said that after we first found out about the plea deal. He said that through the White House after that plea deal fell apart. And so we expect to hear more of the same. But one thing that's really important that has changed since then is what we have also been hearing out of Capitol Hill, right? There are also oversight investigations going on. One of Hunter Biden's former business partners has come out and testified that President Biden, while he was vice president, was actually on various phone calls in which Hunter Biden was dealing business overseas. And so that raises so many more questions, Margaret, about what the president knew, when he knew it, and whether he was involved, which, of course, he himself has always said he has known nothing about those business dealings and was certainly never involved. But I think today you are seeing a commitment, as Garland just pointed out, to getting to the bottom of all those questions.
That's right. And there are things that can be, as the former Attorney General Bill Barr said on Face the Nation last Sunday, things can be shameful without being illegal. So those political questions in Congress, that is separate from what we just heard today from the Attorney General specific to this case involving that federal investigation that has been ongoing through the U.S. Attorney's Office in Delaware for 5 years, an extraordinarily long period of time, ultimately leading us to, as you just laid out there, Weija, that July plea deal that very dramatically fell apart. And I know that in that courtroom that day was CBS's Catherine Herridge, who is with us now, I understand, from the Justice Department and has been speaking to sources there. Catherine, this is a tremendous turn of events. What have you learned about how this will work?
Well, Margaret, good to be with you. It is an extraordinary turn of events when you consider the timeline. As you mentioned, just a few weeks ago, at the end of July, there was an effort by both the prosecutors and Hunter Biden's defense team to wrap up this years-long case with a bow. Until that plea agreement collapsed, the judge deferred a decision on whether to accept or reject it. And what we learned at that news conference just a few minutes ago from the Attorney General is that earlier this week on Tuesday, the U.S. Attorney David Weiss, who's been leading this investigation, approached him and said that he felt the investigation had reached a stage that he needed to continue his work with special counsel status. So what does that mean in the short term? What it means is that Weiss will ultimately deliver a report to the nation about his decision-making in the Hunter Biden case, whether he chooses to bring charges or he declines to bring charges, and that would involve congressional testimony. A former federal prosecutor I spoke to just before this event said to me the appointment of a special counsel would have the effect of delaying a resolution on the Hunter Biden matter, in his opinion. And it would certainly delay any anticipated testimony from the U.S. Attorney in Delaware to Republicans on Capitol Hill who have been seeking that testimony for several months. So it's an extraordinary development considering where the two parties were 2 weeks ago to wrap up this years-long case, now to the appointment of a special counsel that will have these broad authorities, most importantly, to continue this ongoing investigation, Margaret.
Catherine, and it really is interesting, given that it was June 7th, the U.S. Attorney said he had ultimate authority, and then again had said that, to Congress, that he felt he had that, and now this Tuesday says, I need some independence to go further into this investigation. And as we just heard from the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, the investigation is ongoing. We will have more coverage of these legal issues as well as the political impact, because as Catherine just laid out, the timeline for this seems to be dragging on. And as of today, we are 451 days away from a presidential election. And this extraordinary news about the president's son and how the Biden federal government will continue its investigation into him. I want to leave you with this special report on that note and tell you to please stay tuned to CBS News, your local news, and, of course, the CBS Evening News tonight for further coverage. This has been a CBS News special report. I'm Margaret Brennan. Thank you all for watching.